Yeah, this is Unit 5, PowerPoint 3, 1850 to 1854. We're talking about land out west that was got in the late 1840s, Texas annexation, Mexican cession, and Oregon, Texas annexed under James Polk. Actually annexed under John Tyler, but James Polk was president. Oregon country split with Britain in 1846, and the Mexican cession, which was won from Mexico in the war with Mexico. Stemmed from problem with California. Gold was discovered there. As a result, people flocked to California. It became full of immigrants. It skipped over the territorial stage. It wanted to become a state. It caused a crisis because it would unbalance the Senate. There was no slave state to join it. Caused a huge debate in the Senate. Southern states threatened to secede, led by South Carolina. John C. Calhoun made the arguments. Henry Clay attempted to broker a compromise. Unfortunately, the Senate voted it down. However, a guy called Stephen Douglas did push it through as separate bills. The two most important parts of the 1850 Compromise, and understand this was originally one thing that Henry Clay had proposed. It failed as one thing. It was pushed through as separate laws. Big victory for the North is California admitted as a free state, gives the North a control of the Senate. Big victory for the South is a really strong Fugitive Slave Act. And it's the Fugitive Slave Act that we want to focus on. Whether you are doing the essay or the debate, you've got to deal with the Fugitive Slave Act. If you're doing the essay, then that's the main part of the 1850 Compromise that we want to focus on. And when we look at other compromises, we want to figure out why the other compromises worked and why the 1850 Compromise didn't work. If you're looking at the debate, the Fugitive Slave Act is a huge deal because the North and South react differently to it. In class, I suggested that this was, comparing the North victory and the South's victory in the 1850 Compromise was apples and oranges. The North gets a state, California, the South gets the Fugitive Slave Act. It becomes the most controversial part of the 1850 Compromise. The South wants it because more and more slaves are being helped to escape by abolitionists. There's three parts to the Fugitive Slave Act. Number one, all runaways have to be returned. Doesn't matter when they escaped. Number two, it becomes illegal to aid runaway slaves, and the penalties for helping to aid runaway slaves are very, very harsh. A huge fine and or jail time. Another reason that the Fugitive Slave Act was unpopular was that accused runaways did not get access to a jury trial. They did have a trial in front of a magistrate. However, the accused runaway was not allowed to testify. Only white people could testify, which often meant that the accuser of the suspected slave could testify and nobody else. The other thing, that magistrates were paid more to convict people and send them back into slavery. So one of the reasons that the South really wanted the Fugitive Slave Act was the increasing occurrence of slaves escaping and being helped on their way. And this happened so much that we historians refer to what happened as the Underground Railroad. And of course, the most famous conductor on the Underground Railroad was a black former slave called Harriet Tubman. So what kind of impact did the fugitive slave have? Horror stories quickly circulated of slave catchers who were empowered under the Fugitive Slave Act to hunt fugitive slaves down. Um, the slave catchers were empowered to deputize anybody that was in the immediate area and get them to help catch the slave. And what happens is something that says a lot about human nature. Um, a woman called Harriet Beecher Stowe writes a novel, a fictional story called Uncle Tom's Cabin. Abolitionists for 20, 30 years have been talking about how cruel slavery was. Uncle Tom's Cabin convinces more people than any abolitionist. So even though this was a fictional account, people read it and people cried, people identified with the characters in the book. Um, there was a primary source that I handed to you in class. You might want to take a look at that. The primary source takes a look at Uncle Tom. He's a slave who is sold into the South and is treated incredibly cruelly. And he's actually killed. The reading that I gave you is right when his new owner, Simon Legree, a vicious man in Louisiana, is about to kill him. The other part of the story, Uncle Tom's Cabin, deals with a girl slave who actually escapes, and she escapes with her baby. And the climax of the book has her being hunted as a fugitive slave by slave catchers. And she is trying to cross the river Ohio. It's winter. The river is partially frozen, and she is hopping from iceberg to iceberg, trying to evade the slave catchers. To cut a long story short, the book convinced more Northerners than any other abolitionist that slavery was cruel and needed to be ended. You can see the poster on the right-hand side. This was issued by the city of Boston very early on after the Fugitive Slave Act was passed, and a guy called Anthony Burns had been captured and arrested, and Anthony Burns had been living for about 20 years in Boston as a free man. You can see the Boston citizens are being told to watch out for slave catchers. Northern states began to pass laws to get around the Fugitive Slave Act. These collectively are known as personal liberty laws. If you think about it, what these laws are they are the North nullifying the Fugitive Slave Act. Now think back to the 1830s when South Carolina objected to the tariffs, which were a national law. Northern states said, tough, you have to collect the tariffs. A lot of Southerners didn't like this because they saw that the North was being kind of hypocritical here. Franklin Pierce is our next president. He's a Democrat. He is once again chosen because he has absolutely no political career to speak of. He has no strong view on slavery, other than he is a supporter of slavery, but he's from the North. So the Democrats figure that he will appeal to the North and the South. He's from New Hampshire. Under Franklin Pierce, the country expands in terms of diplomacy. If you remember world history, this is when we send ships to Japan to force Japan to trade with us. We buy the Gadsden Purchase from Mexico, this small area right here. And several Southerners are going to attempt to invade Central America and attempt to establish states that maybe one day would join the United States. And these are attempts to, number three, expansion in South America. This is an attempt by some Southerners to expand slavery. One of the key events of the 1850s is the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. As you can see from the map, California is all on its own. A lot of Americans wanted to connect California with the eastern states by a railroad. The question is, where would that railroad go? The Gadsden Purchase right here had been bought by Franklin Pierce and the government with a view to having a southern route for the railroad. But everyone wanted the railroad, including Northerners. Stephen Douglas is the guy who's important for the Kansas-Nebraska Act. He is the guy who was responsible for pushing through the Compromise of 1850. And what he does is he decides that he would like the railroad to go through his home state, which is Illinois. Now the Southerners want the railroad to go here. People in the middle of the country want it to go here. And Stephen Douglas wants it to take a northerly route and go through Illinois. To do that, he's going to have to give something to the Southern members of Congress. What he decides to do is give them the Missouri Compromise. Sacrifice the Missouri Compromise. Kansas-Nebraska Act is going to tear Congress apart and tear the Republican Party apart. Now remember, the Missouri Compromise applied to Louisiana Territory, Louisiana Purchase. We admit Missouri, we admit Maine, and we draw a line in the Louisiana Purchase. North of the line, slavery can't exist. South of the line, it's okay. The Kansas-Nebraska Act gets rid of the Missouri Compromise. In the Northern Louisiana Purchase, it creates two territories, and it says that slavery will be up to the citizens of those territories. So let's go over that again. In the Louisiana Purchase, the Missouri Compromise is no longer operable. So this line, the 3630 line, doesn't exist anymore, other than it's on the map. We're going to create two territories, Kansas and Nebraska, and we're going to say that the citizens who go to Kansas and Nebraska can decide the slavery issue. Obviously, what's implied here is that one of these territories will become free and one would become a slave. This is pushed through by Stephen Douglas, and it is seen as a huge betrayal by Northerners, especially Northern Whigs. This issue is going to tear the Whig Party apart, and we are going to have the formation of a new party, a party dedicated to stopping the spread of slavery, a party that will be entirely supported by Northerners, and that's the Republican Party.